A herd of zombie mastodons stampeded toward Lloyd and his men. Lloyd wondered where they had come from. Were they buried deeper than the ones they had uncovered? The herd rushed straight at him. Lloyd told his men to run. The men scattered, sprinting ahead with Lloyd close behind them. The white cavalry turned as they ran, declaring that even if they died, they would protect everyone. Lloyd told them to shut up and fall back, warning them not to die pointlessly. They obeyed at once, turning and running again. As Lloyd ran, his mind worked rapidly. He searched for a plan, thinking of the terrain and whether he could use it to his advantage. He shouted to Bayan, asking where the young mastodons were. Bayan told him they were on the plain, and Lloyd told him to bring one. Then he shouted to Podong, ordering him to slow the stampeding mastodons down. Podong leapt toward the oncoming herd as Lloyd ran past him. Podong leaped in front of the herd, forcing them to slow as they came to a stop. As the mastodons surged forward again, he punched and kicked them, sending several flying back. The herd continued to press in, forcing Podong backward as he chipped away at their numbers. Then he began using martial arts, striking with controlled movements and sending even more mastodons flying. Lloyd looked back while running, wondering where Podong had learned such a technique. Eventually, the sheer number of mastodons began to overwhelm him. Even then, Podong did not stop fighting. He fought until the very end, until he was buried beneath a pile of mastodons. Suddenly, a voice called out, mocking them as rotten elephants. It was Lloyd. The herd turned toward him. He stood there with a young mastodon beside him. Lloyd told them he had one of their babies, then raised his shovel to its neck as the young mastodon quivered. He licked the young mastodon and warned them that in 5 seconds it would be his dinner. That finally caught the herd's attention. Lloyd asked if they were worried about the young mastodon, then warned them they had better hurry. He said he was getting hungry, biting down into its hide as he grinned at them. The herd roared in anger and charged toward him. Lloyd grinned. They had taken the bait. He thanked the young mastodon for its great acting and slung it over his shoulder. The mastodon trumpeted happily at him. Lloyd knew mastodons were extremely protective of their young. He had hoped that primal instinct would still remain, even as undead creatures. These very mastodons had often come to see their young when they were alive, making sure they were safe and content. It seemed his suspicion had been correct. Lloyd called to Podong, who was now running beside him, and handed over the young mastodon. He told Podong they needed to get through the valley and into the forest, then jumped onto his back. Behind them, the men watched as Lloyd led the zombie herd away. Worry spread across their faces as they realised once again that Lloyd was risking his life for their sake. Elsewhere, Goming rested on a tree branch, singing a depressing song about how hard life was. Suddenly, a hand gripped him and pulled him down from the branch. Javier held him close and told him he needed to go 6 miles north, then asked how fast he could get him there. Lloyd was still being chased by the zombie mastodons as he realised Podong was growing tired and the herd was closing in. He fired mana blasts behind him, trying to hold them off. One struck a mastodon and exploded on impact, but there were too many. They just kept coming. He considered using a triple core blast, then decided against it. It would drain his mana too much. Suddenly, Podong came to a stop. Ahead of them was a dead end. A landslide blocked the path. Lloyd cursed his luck. Lloyd wondered what to do. He told himself he needed to calm down and think. After a moment, he jumped down from Podong and told him to get as close to the wall as possible and hold tight to the young mastodon. He realised there was only one way out. Lloyd began walking toward the stampeding mastodons, knowing he would have to use his triple core mana blast. He charged his shovel and took aim. Then he fired the triple core mana blast. The attack did not strike the mastodons. Instead, it tore upward into the sky above them. Lloyd dropped his shovel and fell to his knees, completely drained as the mastodons continued to charge closer. Then he activated his supercharge skill. Mana surged toward him from all directions, including from the mastodons themselves. One by one, they began to crumble as Lloyd siphoned the magical energy that had reanimated them. He held out his hand, trying to direct the absorption in front of him so he would not drain Podong behind him as well. More and more mastodons collapsed as Lloyd continued draining the mana from their bodies. He remembered when he had first used this skill while trying to level up his mana heart. Back then, it had been wildly destructive, tearing apart everything around him. He had decided then that he needed to control it, and now he had. He had even tried using Javier as a target to refine that control, but for some reason his body had rejected Javier's mana. He continued attacking the mastodons while absorbing their mana, levelling up his mana heart in the process. It began to take a toll on Lloyd. His body was being poisoned. This was not regular mana. It was rotten, tainted by dark magic. He needed to rotate his circles faster to purify his mana heart, but doing so caused damage to it instead. Even so, he continued absorbing everything, continuing to level up his mana heart. Then, suddenly, a class upgrade triggered. He had absorbed enough mana to raise his mana heart to that of a sword expert. Lloyd stopped using mana absorption and slowly stood as the mastodons drew closer. He activated the new skill gained from absorbing the tainted mana. Zombie domination. He ordered them to kneel. All of them stopped and knelt immediately. Behind him, Podong watched in shock. Lloyd flicked a blue seed toward Podong, then smiled and told him it was time to go home. Lloyd stepped over the kneeling mastodons as he made his way out of the canyon. As he passed them, the system confirmed that he could indeed command the undead. But there was a limitation. The zombie domination skill could only be used while directly looking at the zombie. Lloyd paused. Slowly, he looked back. The mastodons at the front were already staring at him. Then the next row turned, and the next, until all of them were facing him. The system informed him he had 40 seconds until he lost complete control. Lloyd ran frantically, pushing himself as fast as he could. The countdown ticked away as he tried to escape. Then it reached 0. He did not make it. The horde of undead pounced on him as Lloyd dropped to one knee, shielding Podong and the young mastodon with his body. Suddenly, a rope of silk dropped down and yanked Lloyd away at the last moment. Out of breath, Lloyd looked down at the zombie mastodons below. He had truly thought he was a goner just then. He looked up and saw Goming flying above him, hauling him away to safety. Then he noticed Javier riding on its back. Javier unleashed his aura sword and urged Goming to move faster. Goming did not look amused. They flew through the canyon as Javier struck the walls with his aura sword, cracking the stone and sending it crashing down below. The falling boulders slammed into the mastodons, making them explode on impact. A chain reaction tore through the canyon, destroying all the undead mastodons. They reached the ridge as Lloyd looked down at the devastation below. Javier jumped down from Goming's back as Lloyd smiled at him and thanked him for saving his life. Javier glared at him, demanding how he could smile after what had just happened. Lloyd looked at him, confused. Javier scolded him, reminding him that he was his knight and that his duty was to protect him and remain at his side. He asked why Lloyd had gone off on his own. Lloyd said he had only been doing construction work and had not expected any of this to happen. Javier told him he had seen everything from above while flying on Goming. Lloyd had used himself as bait to save the workers, and that was unacceptable. Lloyd dismissed the accusation, saying he had only been rounding them up. Javier asked if the plan had worked. Lloyd tried to avoid the question, saying Javier had seen what happened. Then Lloyd asked what Javier was trying to say. Javier finally lost his temper and shouted at him, telling him to think about his own well-being for once. He asked what would happen to the estate if something happened to him, reminding him that thousands of lives would be put at risk. He ended by telling Lloyd to think about keeping himself safe. Lloyd looked at him and asked if it was acceptable for a few people to die so that he could live. Javier told him that was not what he meant. He only wanted Lloyd to stop putting himself in danger. Lloyd raised his voice, asking what would have happened if he had not done what he did. Did Javier truly believe no one else would have been killed if he had done nothing? Javier shouted back that the white cavalry could have formed a wall to protect the others. The remaining soldiers were strong as well, and there might have been another way. Lloyd told him those were all assumptions, and that the workers did not deserve to die after working so hard. He told Javier that he might be the most important person in the estate, but it was his estate, and he was responsible for everyone in it. Javier asked if Lloyd still planned to keep putting himself in danger. Lloyd said of course he would, and that's why he would take home the highest amount of hazard pay. Javier's face twitched in anger. Then he relented, telling Lloyd to do as he pleased. He would stay by his side and deal with whatever came. The system informed Lloyd that Javier's approval rating had increased by 15 points and that he had received a large RP bonus. Javier's assessment of him had also changed, rising from someone he respected to someone he must protect. Lloyd looked at Javier and saw determination on his face as the system informed him that Javier had pledged to die for him if he ever faced death. Lloyd grinned at him and told him he didn't have to go that far. Javier looked at him, confused, and asked what he was talking about. Javier asked Lloyd who could have summoned so many undead mastodons, and asked if he thought it had been Asfahan. Lloyd told him no. They did not have a necromancer capable of casting a spell on that scale. He knew that from the novel, which had gone into great detail about the Asfahan nation. They specialised in martial arts, and using dark magic in that way was not their style. Lloyd turned to Javier and told him to halt all work for the time being. They needed to search for clues. He already knew where to start. Namaran's wall. Everything that had happened today pointed to that place. He had an inkling who was behind it all. Now he just needed evidence. Once he had it, he would hold them responsible for all the damage done to his property. Later, Lloyd had the men dig through the area where the mastodons had been buried, searching for any possible clues. Javier commented that it felt like trying to find a needle in a haystack. Lloyd agreed, but said they had no choice. Construction could not continue while unseen danger remained. He was certain there was something there, a medium used in black magic to command the undead. Suddenly, someone approached on horseback, calling out to Lloyd. The rider informed him that Count Cremo had arrived and wished to see him. Lloyd's eyes narrowed as he wondered what the Count wanted. Lloyd returned to the manor and met with Count Cremo. The Count wasted no time. He asked Lloyd if he wished to marry. Lloyd replied that the Count was not his type. The Count answered that Lloyd was not his type either, then clarified that he was referring to his daughter. Lloyd asked why this was happening so suddenly. The Count said he would get straight to the point. After leaving the last time, he had found himself unable to think of a better son-in-law than Lloyd. Before he had realised it, Lloyd had become famous, and he knew many noble families would soon try to form alliances with the Frontera family. He knew he had to act quickly before any of the other houses did. Then he asked Lloyd which day would be best for the wedding. Lloyd told him to slow down and assured him that he had not received any marriage offers. At that moment, Arcos called out to Lloyd. He produced a sack filled with letters, emptied them onto the table, and explained that they were all marriage proposals. With everything that had been happening recently, Arcos said he had decided not to distract Lloyd with them. Count Cremo stared at the pile of letters, growing visibly anxious. He then said that these matters should be discussed in person, just as he had done, and declared that the wedding would take place at the Frontera residence. Lloyd paused, then thanked Count Cremo for thinking so highly of him. He bowed and told him that he could not agree to the proposal. Count Cremo asked why. He pointed out that Lloyd was 27 and still single, and that if he remained that way, people might start to think something was wrong with him. Javier, standing beside Lloyd, could barely contain his laughter. Lloyd looked at him and asked what he found so amusing. Count Cremo interrupted, asking Lloyd to explain himself. Did he truly not think his family was worthy? Lloyd told him that was not the case at all, then asked him to look to his side. His daughter sat there, visibly devastated by the situation. Trembling, she tried to greet Lloyd and introduce herself, saying she would gladly sacrifice herself for her family before bursting into tears. Lloyd narrowed his eyes. One would think she was being forced to marry the devil. Javier had to use his mana to contain his laughter. Lloyd noticed and told him to settle down. Arcos asked Count Cremo if he might say something on the matter. He told him that looking out for his family was important, but that protecting the hearts of those he held dear was just as important. He reminded him that his daughter would spend the rest of her life with the person she married, and explained that there needed to be love for both of them to be happy. He then asked Count Cremo to honour his daughter's wishes for her own happiness. His daughter's eyes widened at those words, and her tears finally stopped. Count Cremo looked at her for a long moment, then sighed. He apologised to his daughter for nearly sacrificing her happiness for political reasons. She embraced him and thanked him. The two of them stood to leave, and Count Cremo said that the members of the Frontera family never failed to surprise him. He would return home having learned a valuable lesson this day. Then he shouted for them to live in love, and Arcos and Marbella echoed the words back in unison. Lloyd sat on the sofa, looking dejected. He wondered why not marrying him seemed to lead to the happy ending. Nearby, Javier crouched in the corner, concentrating his mana intensely to keep himself from laughing. Lloyd glanced at him and thought that Javier had not even tried that hard when he had fought the giant monster in Cremo. Later, the Queen was informed that Lloyd had rejected every marriage offer he had received. She was not surprised. Their daughters would likely have refused anyway. Lloyd looked far too much like a potato. As the image formed in her mind, she nearly burst out laughing, barely managing to contain herself. Her steward asked if she was all right, but she assured him it was nothing. She then declared that she would be having whole boiled potatoes for dinner. She needed to keep an eye on the potato head's situation. Whichever family allied with him would become the most powerful in the country. She then asked if there was any news regarding the letter they had sent to Asfahan. Her steward reported that Asfahan was refusing to take responsibility for the monster incident. He also warned that their response seemed deliberately provocative. She wondered if they were waiting for her to strike first. After a moment, she declared that a delegation would be sent to Asfahan shortly. Then she wondered if she should throw a potato into the mix as well, rubbing her chin, amused by the thought. Back at the Frontera Manor, Lloyd sat eating dinner with his parents when Bayan arrived and placed a goat's head on the table. He said it had been found close to where the zombie mastodons were buried. Lloyd noticed a symbol carved into its head and realised he had seen it before. It was a symbol used by Dark Queen Alicia in the book. He wondered if the Queen's fall from grace and the Namaran Wall storyline were connected. His actions had already changed many things from the original story. The Queen had not turned evil for one, and the event that had triggered Namaran Wall had not occurred either. In the book, that trigger had been refugees from the monster domino effect fleeing to Namaran instead of the Frontera estate. Now, none of that had happened. Lloyd realised something else was at work, something that had never existed in the book. He already had a suspect. The dark warlock who had built Namaran's wall. Cannavaro. Lloyd turned to Bayan and told him to restart construction at once. Then he added that once it was finished, there was somewhere he planned to visit. Marbella asked where he was going, reminding him that he needed to rest after everything that had happened. Lloyd told her he was going to a place called Namaran. There was something he had to do there. He needed to find evidence of foul play. And then he would deal with the bastard who had caused all of this.